you just had a remarkable ability to make stuff happen that other people say is impossible. From Tesla to SpaceX to so forth, I mean, initial successes with PayPal and so forth. So, and yet you do seem like naturally very introverted entrepreneur, or I mean, engineer and so forth. What is it that you have that so many people who are unbelievably brilliant at engineering or are incredibly good managers or bold business people or what have you, what is it that you have, do you think, that enables you to make this stuff happen?
Well, first of all, I certainly don't think I can, do anything or do most things that people think are impossible. Because I think a lot of what people think is impossible is actually impossible. But occasionally it's not. I guess it's. I think I've said this before. I think it's helpful to have kind of a physics framework for looking at things. Do a first principles analysis, look for negative feedback, and really believe in what you're doing, but not just from a blind faith standpoint. Like to have really thought about it and say, okay, this is true. I'm convinced it's true, and I've tried every angle to figure out if it's untrue, and sort negative feedback to figure out maybe if I'm wrong. But then after all that, it still seems like this is the right way to go. Then that I think gives one a fundamental conviction and an ability to convey that conviction to others and to convince them to join. And that's what a company is. It's a group of people who come together to create a product of some kind. And so if you can convey that and answer the concerns that people have, convince them that this is something that needs to be done, it's important, and here is a path to do it, even if that path has a lot of danger associated with it and risk, and maybe it won't succeed. But people can understand, okay, this is why it's important, and even if the odds are that it won't succeed, it's worth trying to do it. Then I think you can create a great company.
How do you inspire that devotion in people where they will just, we are owners of the product, we are personally insulted, we're going to get up there, this is the greatest thing ever. Like, what is that? You and Steve Jobs have that. What is it?
Well, I think I think it's pretty important that the world move towards sustainable transport sooner rather than later. I mean, it's like there's a real issue out there, and and I think a lot of our customers kind of share that view. So it's more than just a company; it's more than just a product. I mean, there's a cause there. It's something that really matters. So I think that's if people really believe in something. I mean, I really believe in it. It's not. I think it really matters. So, and I think that's why people feel very strongly is that it's something more than just some random product. It's something that's important for the world.
And so when people are sold on that, and you have this, it's not just with Tesla, but with SpaceX and so forth, when you tell the vision and it's part of the sale, I mean, is that really part of it? It is saying, you're buying this, you are getting aboard this mission for a better world?
Yeah, I think it is. I mean, that's not to say that everyone that buys the car believes in that mission. I think most people that buy the car, they just think it's a good car. But there, some people, they think it's a good car, and they really believe that we need to move to sustainable transport as fast as possible. The real tough decision was in 2008. Both SpaceX and Tesla were in a tough spot, and I could either split the funds that I had between the two companies, or focus it on one company and then let the other, with certain death for the other. And that was a really tough decision, because if I decided in the end to split what I had and try to keep both companies alive, but that could have been a terrible decision that may have resulted in both companies dying. and it's kind of like if you've got 2 kids, like how do you make that decision? It's extremely difficult. And we only narrowly made it. In fact, you know, yeah, I mean, the end of 2008 was just really, really terrible. I mean, I never thought I was somebody who could have nervous breakdown. Because like what kind of pussy would have a nervous breakdown? Like you know, that's what I was like. But I came damn close, honestly. On the Sunday before Christmas on 2008, I was like, I woke up that morning thinking, man, this is as close as I've ever come. And then the next day, NASA called and said that SpaceX had won a $1.6 billion contract. And I was like, wow. I couldn't even maintain my composure. I was like, I love you guys. I don't think they've ever gotten that response. And then on Christmas Eve, 6 p.m., December 24th, 2008, we closed the Tesla round. It was the last hour of the last day that it was possible to close the round. And we would have gone bankrupt a few days after Christmas if that round hadn't closed. And just barely did it. And so, you know, we would sort of think things just barely made it by the skin of our teeth there at the end of 2008. And I think if I hadn't invested, or for sure, if I had not invested everything, then it would have been no chance. So.
And so you answered my next question, which is I was going to say, like, now that it's very clear how the story seems to be ending, everyone looks back and they say, well, it was obvious from the beginning. Obviously, it was not.
No.
But so you did have those moments of...
multiple near-death experiences. And like not like death on the nose, like just right in front of you.
What's the emotion like when you go all in and it looks like you're about to lose?
Well, it was quite a terrible emotion, I'd say. But, I mean, I thought actually it was, at that point, it would have been worse if we, particularly in the case of Tesla, but maybe, I mean, also in the case of SpaceX, if we had not succeeded, then we would have been used as a counterexample for why people shouldn't do electric cars or shouldn't try to do private rockets, because, you know, that would have been really bad. It would have been a double whammy of, you know, people would have used Tesla as an example of just another stupid car company, basically. That would have been really terrible. So
I read the famous New York Times story about the old-time car critic who was saying, you know, I got abandoned, these cars just aren't ready for prime time, and so forth. And one of the things I want to ask you is, you and Tesla responded incredibly aggressively to that, saying this is ridiculous, here are the faults, and so forth. And you seem to use that strategy again and again. Is that important in terms of getting the story out there and the acceptance, just behaving like that?
I think it's important to tell the truth, you know, and to rebut things that are wrong. And we actually, I mean, we tried at first to do it nicely, which was we talked to the automotive editor and said, look, the things that are reported here are false. Like, we're looking at the log data and they're categorically false. And they were like, no, we talked to the reporter and it's totally true. And we're like, yeah, okay, that's not getting to the truth of it at all. And they made a public statement at the time that, yeah, everything the reporter said was absolutely true. And then we pointed out, like, look, it's actually impossible because he's internally inconsistent in his article. So that is literally logically impossible. After exhausting any other option, we're like, okay, well, we gotta, you know, tell the truth here and say this is not what happened. You know, that obviously was a tough battle. There's never been a single death or serious injury in a Model S. So we have 0 deaths, 0 serious injuries ever, anywhere in the world. This compares to gasoline cars that have hundreds of thousands. In fact, there are something like 200,000 gasoline car fires per year in the United States per year. And yet, when is the last time you saw something like that as front page news? Moreover, there are 250 to 300 deaths per year. There are 1,000 to 1,500 serious fire injuries per year. That's just in the United States. Again, the Model S has had 0 deaths or serious injuries anywhere in the world. We now have about 25,000 cars on the roads worldwide. And the fires per, the number of, for gasoline cars, there's one fire for about every 1,300 gasoline cars. In our case, there's one fire for every 8,000 cars. So a car is 5 times less likely to have a fire than a gasoline car. That doesn't mean it's 0% likely, because you start to get, the law of large numbers, statistics. Inevitably, there are some issues. But if fire is your concern, you could not be in a safer car. Like, this is the best car as far as fire is concerned. The expert press in the auto industry does realize this, and in fact, there was a great article by the editor of Automotive News, which kind of debunked the Tesla fire risk. But unfortunately, that's within the industry, because they realize that the relative risk, but the popular press does not, even though like simple Google search could sort this out. So I'm not quite sure what to do in this regard. I mean, for sure, if we thought that a recall was warranted, we would do that immediately. I mean, earlier this year, we did a recall for just a little bracket. So we would do that for sure if we thought it was important. But I just don't think there's anything that that could or should be done. The three fires that we had were all as a result of very high-speed impact. And in the case of the second fire, which occurred in Mexico, the guy actually was going very fast. I don't want to say the exact speed, but it was 4 times more impact energy than the most strenuous regulatory test anywhere in the world. You're not supposed to survive an impact of this magnitude, but he did, and he initially hit a roundabout and sheared off 15-foot worth of curb wall, concrete curb wall, and then bounced into a 7-foot-high concrete wall, smashed through that. By this time, the wheels had been ripped off the car, and it was basically just getting along on the battery pack, and then smashed into a tree. The driver and the passengers got out. And then, sometime later, there was a fire in the front of the car.
And if this is like the one...
In fact, he picked our team up from the airport the next day. The amazing thing is that he lived, not that there was a little fire in the front of the car. Yeah, so, I mean, essentially, if safety is something that matters to you, this is the safest car in the world. There is not a safer car. There may be a car that is as safe and that also has 0 deaths and 0 serious injuries, but you can't have, like, negative. So, When before starting SpaceX, I actually was going to just do this philanthropic space mission to Mars, sending a small greenhouse with seeds and dehydrated gel, landing it on Mars, hydrating the gel, and having the plants grow. And you'd have this great shot of green plants on a red background. It was the furthest that life's ever traveled, the first life on Mars. And I thought this would be a good way to get NASA's budget to be bigger. So that was actually, the starting goal was not to create a rocket company. It was actually, how can I make NASA's budget bigger? That was the goal. Because I thought if the budget was bigger, then they would send people to Mars, because that was always the goal after Apollo. But then I came to the realization as I was going through this that my initial assumption was wrong, because even if the budget was much bigger, we might do one mission to Mars, but that we wouldn't be able to send a lot of people to Mars. We wouldn't be able to create a base on Mars. And And so there had to be a fundamental improvement in rocket technology. And so, coming from the perspective of, well, I'm going to lose everything, and hopefully get NASA's budget bigger, then starting a rocket company, relatively speaking, did not seem so risky. I met a bunch of space engineers in the process of trying to figure out this mission to Mars, this Mars Oasis mission, and we got along pretty well. It's kind of a long story, but on my way back from my third trip to Russia to try to buy refurbished ICBMs, I was like really fed up with going to Russia, and I was like, okay, this is kind of silly because even if we launch this on a refurbished ICBM, there's only so many of those, and then we'd run out, and so this wouldn't be a long-term solution. So when I got back, I gathered the little team together that I put together to try to figure out this Mars Oasis mission. And I said, hey, why don't we talk about the feasibility of building a rocket in the US, and is there some fundamental limitation that prevents us from making substantial improvements? Like, have Boeing and Lockheed really approached some asymptotic optimum, or is it possible to do much better? And so I think in the course of doing that sort of working with them on this sort of philanthropic mission, I guess we'd gotten a pretty good rapport, and so and then we went through this exercise together of trying to figure out, could a rocket be built, and we all came to the conclusion that it could. So at least success was one of the possible outcomes, and then they were, most of them, not all of them, but most of them were willing to join and start a company, and they were mostly, they were at big aerospace companies, and they were like top guys at those companies, so there was a big risk for them.
And I read on Twitter this afternoon that you have already designed and think it's perfectly feasible to build a supersonic vertical takeoff and landing passenger ship?
Sure.
Is SpaceX, you going to build one of those too? Soon?
Well, I'm sort of pretty strained between SpaceX and Tesla.
So SpaceX wouldn't build one of these, is sort of
no, but
earthbound transport.
Between SpaceX and Tesla, because Tesla's got the electric powertrain expertise, SpaceX has got the aerospace expertise. Between the two, it's kind of perfect to create a supersonic vertical takeoff and landing electric jet. But there are other things on the plate. So we've got to stay focused on those things. Maybe in the future we'll do something like that.
What's the ultimate goal? I've heard you say, you talk about Mars, colonizing
absolutely.
Mars, you got to pay the bills by putting some satellites up for
exactly.
NASA.
That's the game plan.
Mars.
Yeah, pay the bills by launching satellites and launching cargo to and from the space station, and in a few years we'll be launching astronauts. So we've got to pay the bills to do that, but then use that money to develop advanced rocket technology, ultimately to be able to take people to Mars. And because I think that's the important thing.
Why do you want to go to Mars?
Well, history is going to fundamentally bifurcate along one of two directions. We're either going to be single planet species until some eventual extinction event, or we will become a multi-planet species and be out there exploring the stars. And I like the second one. We should, I think, aspire to that. And we're kind of on our way there with Apollo, and then we seem to lose our way, and we're trying to restore that as much as possible.
And there's another very famous, successful entrepreneur who was also interested in space. In fact, there seem to be a lot of them. It's like a lot of you guys are really into space, which is cool. But so Jeff Bezos, do you put SpaceX up against Blue Origin? Like, who's doing better? Who's going to be first to Mars?
I think we're doing better. I think what Jeff is doing with Blue Origin is cool, and they ought to keep doing that. And I know he's investing a lot of money in it, and I think that's good. I hope they do. I I hope they do really well, because I think it's better if there's more than one company. But thus far, they have not yet demonstrated a reliable suborbital vehicle. And orbit is much harder than doing a suborbital vehicle. Like suborbital vehicle, you could do maybe Mach 3.
Like Richard Branson's.
Yeah, that's also exactly a suborbital vehicle. Well, in the case of Richard, I don't think Richard has any goals besides, kind of, I think it's meant to be entertaining as opposed to like a transport technology. At least the path that they're on does not have an obvious evolutionary, there's not an obvious evolutionary improvement to ultimately orbit with what they're doing. So, but there is Jeff Bezos, there's Branson. Paul Allen was also funding some of the precursor work for what Branson's doing. And I think it's great. So
the question was basically, you are a rocket scientist, but how did you actually learn how to build rockets?
This may sound silly, but I read books and talked to people. I mean, that's kind of how one learns anything. There's lots of great books out there, and there's lots of smart people. And of course, I mean, we've got a team of really, really great people at SpaceX and Tesla. And we've got world experts in propulsion, in structural design, avionics, software, launch operations, that kind of thing. And likewise at Tesla. So, if you just talk to the people on your team, you can learn a tremendous amount. And then as you iterate through problems, it's kind of like almost anything. When you struggle with a problem, that's when you understand it. And that's, so once you've done that for 11 years now in the case of SpaceX, or 10 in the case of Tesla, then you have a pretty good grasp of it. In fact, that's one of the ways, when I interview someone to work at the companies, would be to ask them to tell me about the problems that they worked on and how they solved them. And if someone was really the person that solved it, they'll be able to answer multiple levels. They'll be able to go down to the brass tacks. And if they weren't, they'll get stuck. And then you can say, oh, this person was not really the person who solved it, because anyone who struggled hard with a problem never forgets it.